Think you've seen bad war movies? Wait till you see these. Which one ruined history the worst? Here are 15 World War II clunkers that fumbled facts, botched tone, or insulted veterans while burning cash like kindling. Let's pull the pin. Battle of the Bulge 1965, first shot, and you already feel the disconnect. A battle defined by snow, fog, forests, and freezing terror is suddenly drenched in sunshine with wide-open Spanish plains masquerading as Belgium. That mismatch is your neon warning sign. The production used post-war tanks that look nothing like the real hardware, then staged sunny, cavalry-style charges across flat terrain. Veterans who actually fought in Ardennes trees and ravines called foul. The film's tactics ignore ambush, logistics, and the creeping dread of winter. Instead, it sells a clean, tidy war where armor lines up like chess pieces. Even casual viewers sense something off when the forest looks like a golf course and the weather resembles early summer. Critics at the time tagged it for spectacle over sense. Military advisors complained about invented maneuvers and jumbling dates for dramatic convenience. The financials were decent but nowhere near the prestige hit the studio hoped for, and word of mouth turned frosty fast. The core sin is tone. Bulge was chaos and attrition. Men froze in foxholes. Fuel decided fates. Here, tanks duel in a sunlit arena and commanders deliver speeches like sports coaches. You get a vague morality play with a few handsome vistas and not much else. The result is a museum diorama that confuses bigness with truth. People still watch it for scale and old-school star power, but the more you know about the real Ardennes, the more this feels like a costume party that forgot the weather. U-571 2000. As thriller craft, it's tight. As history, it's a hand grenade rolling in the wrong direction. The story has an American crew snatching an Enigma machine and shifting the war's cipher game. The adrenaline is real. The set design is moody. Diesel hum haunts the soundtrack. Then, the reality check hits. British sailors and intelligence officers had already risked everything to secure Enigma material long before the United States joined the fight. Veterans called it disrespectful. British politicians scolded it in public. The director defended himself with the classic line that he was making drama, not a documentary. But that does not land when you reassign valor that belongs to specific crews and graves. At the box office, it held its own, because underwater cat and mouse never fully goes out of style. Yet the aftertaste lingers. The movie nails cramped tension and pressure door panic. It bungles who actually did what, when, and why that mattered. A wild detail that still rankles historians is how the film compresses months of Code War into one sleek smash and grab. Real cryptanalysis was grind, discipline, and data, with multiple risky seizures and endless pencil work. The film throws a cloak over that and races for heroics. Watch it once for the cinematic beats, then find a book on Bletchley Park and the Royal Navy boardings. You will feel the difference in your bones. Thrills are earned. Credit should be too. Red Tails 2012. Every frame aches to honor the Tuskegee Airmen, which makes the misstep sting. What should have soared as layered biography turns into a Saturday morning serial with sleek planes and thin characters. The dialogue often sounds like a motivational poster read out loud. The aerial scenes punch hard visually, yet they float free of reality, with wild barrel rolls and head-on passes built more for a trailer than for the historical record. The most debated point is the film's embrace of the spotless escort myth, repeated as unbreakable lore rather than complicated truth. Historians pushed back. Reviewers felt the characters were painted in broad strokes. Audience reactions split between love for finally seeing black pilots centered and frustration that the script did not trust them with complexity. A more grounded approach would have explored training, prejudice inside the system, and the tightrope between recognition and risk. The money is on the screen, the emotion is not always. A striking wild detail is how the movie seems terrified of silence. Real fighter pilots talk about stretches of radio quiet where nerves sing louder than engines. Here, banter fills every gap. The film made respectable revenue, boosted by star producers and brand visibility, yet fades in the memory because it turns heroes into decals. Tribute requires bruises, doubt, contradiction, and tiny acts of leadership under impossible rules. The airmen earned that depth. They deserved writing that matched their altitude. 1941-1979. The setup is dynamite. America reels after Pearl Harbor. Rumors fly. Searchlights rake the sky. Paranoia pops like fireworks. What do we get instead? A carnival of noise that mistakes chaos for comedy. Steven Spielberg assembled extraordinary talent and a blank check, then pushed everything to 11. The timing wobbles. Gags repeat. Characters enter at scream level and rarely come down. Even John Wayne reportedly told Spielberg the script offended him, which became its own publicity grenade. The problem is not daring to laugh at panic. Dark comedy can humanize fear. The problem is tonal slippage. 1 minute you're watching a Looney Tunes brawl. The next, the film remembers where its premise comes from and tries to be topical. The stitch shows. Critics blasted the excess. Audiences came curious and left overwhelmed. The box office placed it below expectations for a filmmaker who was printing gold. A concrete oddity is how meticulously the production recreated wartime trappings only to undercut them with clowning that never breathes. Imagine a vintage fighter rolling down Main Street while a dozen subplots try to outshout each other. It is impressive and exhausting. The lesson is simple. You can stage pandemonium, but the audience needs a spine to hold on to, a point of view, a human heartbeat. 1,941 pounds. The drum so loud you forget what the parade is for. Even its defenders call it a fascinating misfire that taught a master to trust restraint. Pearl Harbor 2001. A movie about one of the darkest mornings in American history, spends most of its energy on a sunlit triangle. That is the core frustration. Michael Bay delivers immaculate aircraft, precision explosions, and smoke that curls like a fashion shoot. He also delivers scenes where brave sailors become extras in someone else's romance. Veteran groups criticize the historical liberties. Historians flagged invented heroics, compressed timelines, and bizarre subplots that turn the Pacific into a personal diary. Critics caught the vibe immediately. Beautiful surfaces. Hollow center. The attack sequence deserves technical credit. The human story around it rarely lands. Consider a wild detail. The film tries to pivot from tragedy to a revenge mission climax, as if grief can be edited on a timeline. Real families waited for letters that never came. Real crews trained under fear and fatigue. The movie treats emotion like a runway for set pieces. Financially, the global box office was strong, thanks to star wattage and marketing, but the legacy is stuck in debate. Younger viewers remember the glossy shots. Students of the war remember the shortcuts. The best war films honor the small decisions under pressure. Pearl Harbor points at the grand gesture and forgets the quiet courage in the smoke below decks. That imbalance is why it sells tickets but never truly earns tears. USS Indianapolis Men of Courage, 2016. Read the real story and your chest tightens. Torpedoes. A sinking. Hundreds in the water with salt, thirst, and dorsal fins slicing the surface. Days of delirium. Rescue at the last gasp. It is nightmare material, perfect for raw survival cinema. The film gives you rubbery digital sharks, wobbly accents, and scenes that slip from grim to melodrama without warning. Performers work hard, yet the script throws in side plots that sand down the terror. The pacing wanders when it should tighten like a tourniquet. Critics shook their heads. Many called it a TV-level treatment of a tale that should scar the screen. Box office was weak compared to its ambitions, and the home release did not ignite reappraisal. A maddening detail is the way the camera often pulls away from the water to follow invented drama on land. The truth is already unbearable. Men hallucinated rain, friends drifted away, the sun ate skin. You do not need to decorate that with cliches. When war films fail, it is often because they fear the quiet, the waiting, the minute-by-minute erosion of hope. This story needed patience and precision. Instead, it rushes the horror and stalls on the filler. Courage is not just gunfire, it is choosing to show suffering without flinching. The film tries, then blinks. Miracle at Street. Anna, 2008. Ambition floods every scene, which is why the errors feel so loud. Here is a film determined to center black soldiers in Italy and link their bravery to a buried atrocity. The canvas is vast. The performances flash with energy, yet the plot weaves in mysticism and contrivance that jar against the documented massacre it references. Survivors and historians called out misidentifications and invented collaborations that stain real communities. That clash between intent and impact sunk the film's reputation in Italy, where memory is personal and names are still spoken in prayer. Critics in the United States focused on structure. The film feels both too long and too rushed, hopping tones when it should sit in grief. Audiences divided. Some celebrated finally seeing Buffalo Soldiers taken seriously. Others argued that representation must come paired with historical care. The box office reflected that split, with soft domestic numbers for a production of this size. A wild detail that reveals the wobble is the use of a literal artifact mystery to glue the timelines. It plays like a heist hook stapled to a war elegy. That kind of hybrid can work when the writing locks it all to character. Here, the stitch shows and the message blurs. The tragedy at the center deserved clear eyes. You feel the passion behind the camera. You wish it had been harnessed to a script that trusted truth over adornment. Airstrike, 2018. You can sense the executive deck notes in every frame. Add stars. Add more planes. Add more slow motion. Add a dubbed cut for one market and a re-edit for another. Result? A war film so choppy it could give you a headache. The story about bombing raids and civilians should be harrowing. Instead, scenes collide like trailers for different movies. Performances do not match because tones do not match. One actor plays solemn heroism. Another seems trapped in a cartoon. The visual effects vary wildly from shot to shot. Some explosions read as weightless bursts pasted onto the frame. Reviewers pounced, and audience ratings cratered. The film's international release dance became its own cautionary tale, with delayed rollouts, streaming dumps, and muted marketing. A wild, almost unbelievable detail is that the movie arrived with brand-name cameos and still generated a near-zero critical consensus. That is hard to do. Viewers love to forgive a mess if there is heart or a single terrific sequence. Airstrike rarely offers either. War cinema needs geography you can read and stakes you can feel. Here, the map is foggy and the people are paper. The financials reflected the confusion, with a scattershot performance across regions that never added up to a win. It is proof that you cannot patchwork a good movie from impressive pieces. You need a soul, a point of view, and a plan. All the Queen's Men, 2001. On paper, this should have been a riot. A ragtag spy unit infiltrates a German factory to help capture Enigma material while posing as factory workers in disguise. In the right comedic pocket, that could have delivered a sharp blend of caper energy and wartime stakes. Instead, you get a strangely flat movie that never decides what kind of laugh it wants. The jokes arrive with drumroll pauses, but the punchlines barely whisper. Scenes stall as if waiting for audience applause that never comes. The result is a comedy that feels weirdly embarrassed of its own premise. The filmmaking often looks clean, but clean is not the same thing as alive. Rhythm matters. Great capers snap from setup to payoff, with propulsive cuts and escalating complications. Here, complications are just costume changes. The heist engine never kicks. The tone wobbles from broad skit to mild thriller without finding that sweet middle where danger and wit spark off each other. Even the espionage nuts and bolts feel undercooked, which is wild given how thrilling the real Cold War could be. Critics called it sleepy and miscalibrated. Audiences mostly missed it in theaters, and those who caught it later wondered how something built for farce could end up so airless. The box office was a shrug. The afterlife on home video never built cult praise either, because there are no scenes that people insist their friends must see, no set piece that becomes a calling card, no quotable line to save at the last second. Here is the wild detail. The film sits on a genuine powder keg of tension, since the target is the code machinery that shaped the timing of convoys and raids. That is thriller gold. Yet the movie treats that pressure like a prop, not a fuse. Farce can honor history when it respects the weight beneath the gag. This one trips over its own shoes, then tries the same step again. The mission never feels urgent. the laughs never feel earned. By the end, you do not feel that a wartime objective was achieved or even meaningfully attempted. You feel like you watched a long rehearsal that never reached opening night. Which Way to the Front 1970. Jerry Lewis brings his zealous energy to a World War II romp about a wealthy American who raises a private unit to strike the enemy. The pitch promises a madcap takedown of bluster and incompetence. The screen delivers clatter without aim. Gags slam into each other, louder rather than smarter, as if volume could conjure timing. Lewis is fearless with physical beats, but the film keeps showcasing noise instead of the razor edges that make satire draw blood. It wants to tweak arrogance. It ends up tilting at cardboard. The trouble is tone. Great wartime comedy understands that horror sits just off camera, which makes every joke a tightrope step. This film treats that truth like a rumor. It elbows you in the ribs with wink after wink, then repeats the same crowd scenes and mugging. The supporting cast does not help, since characters exist to set up bits rather than to drive an actual story. When a punchline lands, it usually lands in isolation, not as part of a rolling momentum where each gag elevates the next. Reviewers were sharp in their disappointment. Many said it felt dated on arrival, which in comedy is a thunderclap. Theatrical performance was tepid. The legacy grew harsher because Lewis, one of the most creative clowns of the century, all but vanished from features for a stretch afterward. That retreat became part of the myth. Fans point to brighter works. Detractors point to this as proof that even titans can miss when they forget precision. A telling detail is how often the film confuses mockery with wit. Mockery is volume and face-pulling. Wit is architecture. The greatest comedic war scenes build like music, with crescendos and rests, with surprise reversals that reveal character along the way. Which Way to the Front wants the crescendo in every bar, so the ear dulls and the mind wanders. War comedy should punch up, puncture pomp, and reveal the absurdity that power creates. This movie jabs at targets without landing the knockout or even a clean scorecard. The premise deserved a scalpel. It got a mallet. Back to Bataan 1945. Made while the wounds were still bleeding, this action drama folds the brutal fall of the Philippines into a grand rescue fantasy, then hands most of the spotlight to an American officer with speeches and swagger. Audiences at the time craved vindication. The studio delivered it in bold strokes, and the box office responded. Decades later, the simplifications clang. Filipino resistance was sophisticated, daring, and relentless, formed from local knowledge and terrifying improvisation. The film treats that entire ecosystem like set dressing for one foreign hero's catharsis. The staging is muscular and the pacing never drifts, yet the story keeps bending history to suit a cleaner arc. Villainy becomes a mask, not a system. Heroism becomes a few applause lines, not the accumulation of daily risk that ground down entire families. Real units built networks in jungle, village, and city, smuggling intel under the noses of occupying forces. The movie prefers to underline a single raid or ambush, as if that defines the struggle. It is an approach that erases while pretending to honor. Critics, in recent decades, have pushed back on the imbalance, calling it the kind of wartime myth-making that can be understood in context, yet still challenged for perspective. The film's imagery remains striking, especially in battlefield close-ups that prefigure later combat cinema. But the narrative spine funnels everything toward a single flag, an old studio reflex that does not survive modern scrutiny. When history teachers assign this era, many now spend extra time unspooling what the film compresses or mislabels. Consider one revealing detail. Whenever a local character starts to gather dimension, the script pivots back to the visiting officer, as if the camera is nervous to linger. That nervousness is the tell. True tribute would sit quietly with the people who endured occupation and built resistance from language, geography, and trust. This movie admires them in passing, then hurries to the exit line. It plays well as a time capsule of morale cinema. It plays poorly as a guide to what actually happened. The courage is real. The focus is wrong. Bataan's memory deserves a lens that widens, not narrows. The Purple Heart 1944. The Purple Heart is a courtroom drama inspired by reprisals against captured airmen, constructed to rally a nation mid-war. Its power is obvious. Its problem is painful. It paints every adversary with one sneer and stacks the deck so completely that nuance cannot breathe. Released while Japanese Americans were being incarcerated at home, it poured more fuel on a fire of suspicion and fear. The movie operates like a sermon where the conclusion is decided before the first line of testimony. The rhetoric is polished, but rhetoric is not truth. The trial scenes are staged with skill. Lighting and composition push you exactly where the filmmakers want your heart to go. That is propaganda's secret strength. It feels like pure cinema, even when it is pure framing. Over time, scholars have pointed to the film as a case study in how mainstream entertainment can dehumanize with a velvet touch. There is no room for ordinary soldiers trapped in a machine, no space for complexity in motives or behavior. Contemporary audiences cheered, and the box office did what wartime studios expected. History's judgment is colder. The film did its job as morale booster and did collateral damage to the public square by presenting an entire people through a mask of cruelty. That mask does not stay inside theaters. It walks into classrooms and workplaces. It lingers in policy. A telling detail is how carefully the script closes every door that might invite empathy for anyone on the other side. Even a hint of doubt is treated like treason to the plot. Great courtroom cinema lets uncertainty inhale, if only to make the final verdict thunder. Here, the only thunder is volume. The lesson is not that wartime cinema must be soft. The lesson is that power deserves scrutiny, especially when it wears the costume of justice. The Purple Heart reminds us how easily a well-made movie can turn fear into certainty. That is why it belongs on a list of misfires, not for craft, but for the moral fog it thickened. The Longest Day, 1962. This is the world's most handsome history book, with half its pages stuck together. The stars arrive like parade floats. The cinematography is crisp. The scope is staggering. Yet the film treats D-Day like a master schedule, not an open wound. It compresses timelines, smooths chaos, and drifts toward a celebratory march, when the truth was closer to a gamble that might have ended in disaster. Commanders hesitate in real life. Radios crackle with bad news. Landing craft vomit men into water and smoke. The movie acknowledges this, then flattens the spikes to keep the parade moving. Composite characters crowd out the unglamorous roles that saved missions. Field engineers who cut obstacles. Junior officers who improvised under fire. Local civilians who risked everything to guide. The story prefers familiar faces, which makes marketing sense and historical nonsense. When a sequence is thrilling, it is often because production muscle recreates hardware and geography with obsessive care. But thrill is not the same as texture. Texture requires you to feel the blind spots and the fear. Critics at release applauded the ambition and questioned the tone. Decades later, the film survives as a gateway for younger viewers, a big door that leads smarter audiences toward books and primary accounts. As scholarship deepened, the movie's shortcuts grew brighter. Many teachers now present it alongside maps and testimonies so viewers understand what is streamlined and why. The box office was strong, and the cultural footprint is huge. That is part of the issue. When a version becomes the version in memory, it can eclipse raw testimonies that contradict the screenplay's rhythm. Listen for one small truth the movie rarely captures. Confusion. Real confusion. Orders garbled by surf and blood. Units that landed in the wrong sector and still made the difference. The Longest Day knows these facts, but wraps them in order. It is gripping as spectacle, responsible as a survey, and faint as human experience. A better title might be The Most Coordinated Day. The invasion was coordinated only until it met the sea. After that, courage and luck wrote the script. The Battle of the River Plate, 1956. Handsome officers, tidy orders, and naval etiquette run headlong into the reality that sea combat is a furnace. This film is content to stand with the gentlemen and observe, when it should squeeze the audience inside compartments hot enough to melt paint. The historical engagement around the Graf Spee was a game of nerves and gunnery with massive stakes for crews who bled in water and smoke. The movie captures the chessboard, not the terror. It treats maneuver and range as drawing room conversation, which mutes the emotional frequency until it barely hums. The cinematography has real grace, and model work displays that old craftsman charm. You can enjoy the care and still wish the perspective would plunge. Characters often speak in refined tones, giving the clash a ceremonial air that skews toward pageant. Reviewers have long noted that the film is worthy yet strangely soporific, an odd outcome for a story that should raise your heartbeat. Procedural clarity is a virtue, but when a procedure ends with a shell smashing steel and bone, clarity must be married to dread. The performance of the film was respectable in its time, especially among audiences who favored sturdy, respectful dramatizations. Its afterlife is steady rather than beloved. Viewers who return to it often do so for nostalgia or technical curiosity, rather than for adrenaline or insight. That says a lot. The best military films let you smell the cordite and taste the salt. This one asks you to admire the uniforms and plot the bearings. One telling detail is how little the movie allows silence to terrify. On ships, silence is not calm. Silence is the space before the next salvo lands. Crewmen hear their own breath and the groan of metal. Here, silence often reads like decor. That single misread explains the larger one. War at sea is claustrophobia wrapped in infinity. You feel small under endless sky while standing 3 decks from a magazine that could turn your steel world into steam. The film nods at that truth. It never makes you live it. The Great Escape, 1963. Iconic theme, immortal motorbike, endless charm. Also, a towering reshuffle of credit and tone. The real breakout was largely planned and pushed by British and Commonwealth officers who built a universe of paperwork, tunnels, and patience. Americans were transferred before the escape. The film, bowing to star power and market math, centers American swagger and adds chases that never happened. Audiences cheer because the craft is so confident. Historians wince because the cost is so high. 50 recaptured prisoners were murdered. That reality thunders through every page of history. The movie lets triumph and camaraderie do most of the talking. None of this makes it a bad movie. It makes it a strange World War II movie. When you dramatize a tragedy this severe, tone must kneel to truth. The film instead lets daring do soak up the oxygen. The tunnel work is magnificent on screen, and the performances are warm and witty. Those virtues can coexist with the critique. The toolkit of Hollywood, especially in that era, prized a clean uplift. The truth of Stalag's storylines resists uplift. It whispers endurance and grief and the mathematics of courage. Critics at release were dazzled, and box office success turned it into a universal reference point. Generations discovered prisoner of war cinema through it. Later, with scholarship expanding and survivors' accounts widely read, the gaps became more glaring. Families of the murdered remembered a tone of celebration. Veterans remembered colleagues whose names the screenplay barely touches. Teachers now often pair the film with readings that restore scale and sources, a way to let students enjoy cinema while learning where cinema strays. Here is the indelible detail. A single bike jump became the memory of an entire operation for millions of viewers. That is the spell of movies, and the danger. The real miracle was paperwork forged by candlelight and quiet authority. The real action was the scrape of a tunnel board, not a leap over barbed wire. The Great Escape earns its place in film history. In World War II history, it sits on probation. Love the craft. Question the record. That is the only honest way to hold it. Your turn. Which entry made you angriest? And which notorious stinker did I miss for Part 3? Drop your picks and your reasons. If a war film lies, should it be taught as fiction in schools or left to rot in the bargain bin? Say it loud in the comments.